I'm sure we've all run into a game that we thought was a fully released game, only to find out that it was an early access game that had a lot of development ahead of it. Honestly, it seems to be the new norm for a game to be in early access now. I'm not going to name any names, but for a good number of games, they stay in early access for years sometimes. Well, since games are being sold and people are paying money for these in early access form, I feel with a price tag also comes with the responsibility to be held up for review. Of course, early access games are subject to change and evolve over time. But this is kind of a test series I'm trying out, so if you want to see more worth the early access review videos, let me know down in the comments and include some suggestions of games you'd like me and the rest of the Cubold crew to check out. How's it going, everyone? I'm Kale from Cubold Gaming, and although I do enjoy the game, is TinkerTown really worth the early access? So I'll split the video into a couple of different sections, but first I kind of want to explain what TinkerTown is all about and what it offers in its current state. So TinkerTown is an open world sandbox game, and if you watch the YouTube short that I made about it, I described it as being a combination of having the mechanics and movement of Forager, the bosses from Terraria, and the overall look and feel of the older Zelda games. Another similarity that the game has with Terraria is that you can have multiple characters that can cross over to other worlds, including your friends' worlds. The worlds are procedurally generated with multiple biomes, which right now includes a forest, desert, and winter biome. Each of the biomes have their own enemy types, and just recently each of the biomes now have their own background music. In the forest biome, you have your goblins, bats, and slimes. In the winter biome, you have snowmen, specters, and ice slimes. The desert biome has a lot of enemies like mummies, turtles, vultures, and a lot more. Plus this one worm thing that literally will not stop until it kills you. Not only are there biomes, but there is also a dungeon system in the game, and you can access this through the various tunnels around the map. The dungeons also have their own enemy types. You see the same bats, but you also come across the harder types of enemies, the skeleton guards. And if you go to a certain place in the dungeon, you'll find the first boss, but I'll talk about him a little later. The game does feel extremely similar to Forager. The graphics are pixelated, the theme is fun and cute, but I think it breaks away from a lot of these in that the building and the three-dimensional feel of the map is really what makes it so unique. Anyone who sees the footage seems to be instantly interested just by how the game looks itself. I mentioned the building, and the game allows you to build with the usual tools you'd imagine: walls, floors, pillars, and it's all really basic essential items as of now. And the game is multiplayer, but it's limited to only 3 players. Also, just like in Terraria, you have all your mining tools and materials here. Well, not as many materials. You have your copper, iron, silver, and gold. These can all be smelted in your furnace to make bars, which can then be used for other things. And with those materials, you can craft different tiers of armor, swords, axes, shields, and pretty much all of the usual stuff you'd expect from a game like this. You also have your crafting stations like your crafting bench, tailor, and alchemy station. Obviously, I'm kind of giving a general overview on everything, but that's pretty much what TinkerTown is and what it offers now. So now that you have an idea about what the game is about, it's important for me to talk about my opinion on the game and whether or not I think what it offers now is enough to recommend a purchase. Again, I am critiquing the game in its current state, so obviously, well, hopefully the game will improve, but whether or not it's worth purchasing now. And after I do a little bit of a review on the early access, I'll go over what the game has ahead of it, and hopefully that'll give you a complete picture if you're looking into the game. The very first thing I feel I need to mention are the bugs. Now, the bugs usually aren't a huge issue for me, especially in early access titles, but in some cases, when it makes the game unplayable, that's where it gets to the point where it does matter to me. I did run into some bugs in TinkerTown. Most were smaller things like items I threw down would disappear or get stuck under a floor, but there is a recurring bug that is basically game breaking. The very first world that I made has a bug that creeps up almost every single time I play on it. Basically, the bug stops all enemies from moving at all. They still attack me, but they won't move at all. This actually really broke the immersion for me and made the game feel stale. I did eventually start a new world, and the problem luckily didn't transfer over. Other than that bug, along with some minor little bugs, the game feels and runs great. Personally, I love the art style. Actually, without knowing anything about the game, that's kind of the reason I got it. I know pretty shallow, but it looks a lot different than what you'll see most of the time. Now, as for the content of the game right now, I don't know. It has the very basics of what a game like this offers. But the only problem that I'm having is that I don't know that it offers enough for the amount of money that you're paying for it. The enemy types vary, but nowhere near anything like Terraria. Right now, it just seems you see a lot of the same enemies and they all feel the same. You do get a lot of variety in the other biomes, and that really makes up for the lack of variety in all the other places. As for the essential mechanics and tasks of the game, it feels great, honestly. The mining and the wood gathering is fun and enjoyable, and the building is actually pretty great. You do gotta remember that you only have one floor to work with, since that's how the game is built, but you can do a decent amount with what they give you. I do also want to say that the game doesn't really seem to have a lot of assets, meaning you see the same items all over the map. The items you can get from the dungeons are the exact same items that you can craft and make yourself. Basically, if you decorate your house, the inside of your house is going to look exactly how the inside of the dungeon looks. It's a little disappointing, and it didn't really push me to want to decorate my house because all of the items are the same throughout the map. Also, there isn't any good loot in the dungeons. Actually, most of the time you don't see any loot. If you do happen to get some loot, it'll be the same items you see everywhere else. And while I'm on the topic of the dungeons, they all seem to be the same basic layout. I've explored the dungeons on 2 separate worlds of my own with different seeds, as well as a friend's world, and the dungeons all felt like the same layout. Now, the maps are said to be procedurally generated, but I'm not so sure about the dungeons. I do have to say that I really like a lot of the contrasting areas you find when exploring the dungeons though. A lot of the times you see small streams of water or even some sandy saturated areas. I think it's just something that you don't really expect in that setting, but it worked really well and it made exploring the dungeons a lot more enjoyable. And speaking of dungeons, you are able to find the first, and as of right now, the only boss in the game. He doesn't have a name, just boss. Now, the first time I found him in the dungeons, he was bugged from that glitch I was mentioning earlier. But being myself and feeling unsatisfied with the kill, I started up another world and went back. This is actually what led me to think that the dungeons were the same, since I went the exact same route to find him. Anyway, the boss was extremely easy to beat, and it seemed he had very little health. And well, it's not really comparable to something like a Terraria boss. I know it sounds like I'm ragging on the game, but it does cost $16.99, and that's a lot for a game like this, especially being in early access. And I do really like the art style and the feel of the game. It's a lot of fun with friends, and again, the building and the gathering aspects of the game are really solid. Honestly, it feels, I know you saw this coming, but unfinished. Obviously, being early access, you'll find that to be true. But it is $16.99 like I said before, and it just feels like too much money for a game that offers so little at the moment. When you go out exploring, it'll probably take you about a couple hours to find everything that's in the game, and the alchemy and crafting are pretty limited right now. The only couple of potions I can think of off the top of my head are healing and teleportation potions. So it's not like there's really much there now either. I don't know, in my opinion, it just seems very lackluster at the moment, but I won't lie to you. I do have a lot of fun when I'm playing it, and I see a great future for the game. Now I'll briefly show you some of the exciting things that are coming to the game. So here's what the Head Up Games official roadmap looks like. So right off the bat, they are updating the dungeons, which, like I was saying before, need improvement. We then are getting a new lava biome, which should really be interesting and add more content to the game. The NPC update is going to really flesh out the game and make it feel more lively. We're also getting some mini bosses, which will actually help the amount of content that the game has, because one boss alone just doesn't cut it for the price. After that, we have some mystery updates, and I see class updates also, which sounds really interesting to me because the website mentions being able to break off into your own combat style. playstyles, whether it be a wizard or something like a swordsman. All of what I see here looks really promising, and it actually pretty much focuses on all the cons that I brought up before. So now comes the real question that needs to be answered. Is TinkerTown worth the early access? Well, at this point, I'd actually have to say no. As much as I do enjoy the aesthetic and charm of the game, I just can't recommend it for the $16.99 price tag that it has. I mean, I'm talking in a few hours, you will see everything that the game has to offer. And maybe if it were $5 to maybe $10, I'd be okay with recommending it. But for what it is now, it just feels way too bare bones for me. Now, don't let this turn you away from the game. I see this game in a year or so being a huge success. This type of video isn't so much one that aims to turn you for or away from any title, but rather to help you decide on whether a game is worth waiting for or buying into the early access. So, TinkerTown doesn't offer enough now to warrant the price tag that it has, but from the roadmap and the general feedback from the game now, this game is definitely going places. So, make sure to add this to your wish list and keep an eye on it for a while. But as always, this is just my personal opinion, and if you find the game to be worth it now, there still is a good amount of fun to be had in the game, even now. Alright, well, I think that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for sticking around to the end. If you haven't already, a like and subscribe is always appreciated, and we also have a gaming podcast where you'll get to hear the Cubold crew's opinion on a wide variety of games in a longer, more relaxed format. All links are in the description below.